commences with a sudden burst of bright light illuminating the screen. A cursor, reminiscent of a computer interface, hovers over what appears to be a battlefield, signaling that the unfolding events are situated within a game. Still, the conflict continued, and it is a fierce battle between two factions. One venerating a god named Nebula, and the other devoted to a god named Hegemonia. Each side engages in intense warfare, showcasing unique specialties and strategies, and the supposed gods wield control over their respective believers, akin to players maneuvering pieces in a game of chess. However, the player's freedom surpasses that of chess, allowing them to unleash formidable actions, such as launching nuclear attacks on the battlefield, which the player Nebula had approved, launching several nuclear warheads to his opponent's side. But even with this, player Hegemonia wasn't fazed, as he had anticipated this already, launching tower-like structure embedded with faith as a form of an interceptor missile, which revealed to be super effective, as the missiles instantly were blown up. But that was within his calculations. The enemy's missile interception system couldn't keep up with him, as a single one was left unscathed, and it was heading right to the center of the enemy's imperial palace, where countless of orcs were just praying diligently for their god to save them. And if this was reality, prayers would be meaningless. But this wasn't reality. This was Lost World, and faith and prayers in this world always produce meaningful results, just like how a spirit just suddenly materialized because of the faith of the people, stopping the nuclear attack from landing on their territory. However, Nebula wasn't surprised, as he expected this cheap opponent to be using the current meta, the Holy Oak strategy, which Hegemonia, the second placer in the server ranking, was openly proud of, and therefore even mocked Nebula because of his failed attempt. But Nebula couldn't blame Hegemonia for coming out with such confidence, because this was an overpowered strategy all along. As it is easy to increase the population due to the nature of the orc race, and as the number of believers increased, faith resources were also quickly acquired. Science, technology, and culture were then gained through invasion. This was a good strategy that constantly received good reviews because the great amount of faith accumulated, and the large number of orcs resulted in an advantage in war, and the fact that the opponent chose the sky as their realm meant that they were aware of and took into account Nebula's choice of skill, the science development skill. This prevented him from using majority of his aerial arsenal. They even prepared behind the scene to counter his nuclear attack, seeing that they can summon a spirit chain apostle with a high caliber at such a fast rate. However, Nebula remained unimpressed, as this was all too obvious for him. So even if his opponent has large territory that even reached the skies, it is still just a sky above their heads, so he just need to have a weapon beyond it. And because of this realization, he had prepared an AI-operated military satellite made from ancient relics, equipped with the rods from God. Even Hegemonia was shocked to see that Nebula has this weapon, as he didn't expect after a nuclear weapon. He still has a high-mass weapon more destructive than the last. With this, Hegemonia could only scream at Nebula to stop, but Nebula doesn't give a shit to what his opponents wanted, and therefore he just let his attack continue. It is just a few tungsten rod after all. Still, Hegemonia attempted to block it with his spirit chain apostle, but Nebula was confident that it would fail. With the rod adding up the accumulated gravitational acceleration, it has the speed approximately 10 times the speed of sound, and with this, the rod just went through the apostle like it was butter, and when it made contact on the ground, it made such a devastating sight, as it penetrated the ground with such force on par with a nuclear weapon, just without the nuclear after effects. But still, the Emperor was now dead, the underground temple collapsed along with the Imperial Palace, and therefore the faith that Hegemonia built will disappear. And after that happens, the apostles will also disappear. With this, Nebula won, and was still the #1 ranker of the game. But just like any player would do, before he leaves, he told Hegemonia GG. Skill issue? However, Hegemonia couldn't accept such outcome, as he was a sore loser after all, and so he demanded another round. And this bitch even has the audacity to proclaim that this will be the beginning of his winning streak. But just like before, Nebula remained unimpressed, and so he stoically just declined Hegemonia's request. Still, he can't help but wonder if Hegemonia has still few tricks up his sleeves, as he still strongly believed to win against him. However, being the #1 ranker for a while, he knew all too well that there was nothing that Hegemonia could do that would surprise him, as the game itself has nothing new to offer, and the fact that he was able to complete all the achievements available and maintained first place in the rankings was enough of a proof that the game is nothing more to offer to him. And so, slowly but surely, he decided to quit playing. To his surprise, before he could leave, a message suddenly popped up on his screen, which initially irritated him at first, because who on earth is bothering him at this time of day? Still, curiosity got the best of him, and so he opened the message, only to be met with praise. congratulating him for having the only one who has cleared all achievements, and the game really appreciated that he enjoyed Lost World so far. But seeing such message only confused him. He could only see these things when the game would announce an end of service. But due to the game's popularity, it seems like it wouldn't be the case. So he clicked more to see what's more of this sudden message. To his surprise, it revealed to him that the game he had been playing was just an early beta access, and would be scheduled to be officially released. So as the top player Nebula, they give him a rare opportunity to enjoy the game before official service. And because he is on the pursuit of seeing more of this game would offer, he accepted their request. And with this, he was instantly sucked in a sea of codes, where binary codes float endlessly, but not even a moment passed. Darkness ensues soon after. After that, the empty space began to reveal the countless of stars that occupied it. Under those said stars was a familiar figure. It was Nebula's game avatar. Opening his eyes, light shines mirroring the magnificent sight before him, a view far from what he was used to. Beautiful, but it felt like it was a ruin of some sort, where stone columns in a rugged style reminiscent of Greek temples circled the place. But the strange thing was that the sky was black, even though the horizon was visible. This could only mean that there is no atmosphere. Obviously, one wouldn't be able to breathe without an atmosphere. And looking at himself, he recognizes that he was in the body, the character he was playing. And so he got up thinking that all of this was just a vivid dream. Unexpectedly, a mysterious figure approached from behind and informed him that it is not, and he is here because he has been chosen. But before he could formulate a response, the enigmatic woman, draped in a flowing robe, warmly welcomed him, addressing him by his real name, Sung-won. After that, she introduced herself as Alden. This instantly raised questions of how this figure got to know his real name. Who is this woman? More than that, what does she meant by being chosen? But before he could find answers, shadows suddenly begun to appear before his eyes, which surprised him at first. But he knew the silhouettes of the shadows were those of ordinary people. He knew this because the shadows were also surprised and looking around just like he was. And noticing that Nebula was already aware of what the shadows truly were, Alden explained why they were covered in mystery. And that is because they all come from the same world. And since there is a chance of them knowing one another, they have covered everyone in shadows for a fair game. But this doesn't explain why they were here exactly. And so she decided to get straight to the point. She raised her hand and revealed to them the Earth. But looking at it closer, the continents of this planet was different from what Earth had. It was a view of the place they have seen many times. So it was undoubtedly the planet of the Lost World. And in this vast Lost World, the players had become a true god. This surprised everyone. Even if Nebula couldn't hear any sound from other players, he felt it very well. There are people who felt embarrassed of how cringe-worthy the statement was. The dialogue felt like it came from an edgelord. Still, since they got nothing better to do, they continued to listen what Alden have to say. So Alden told them that the Lost World they knew of isn't a world that simply exists in the game. It's a land abandoned by the gods due to an incident in the past. On that planet, a once brilliant civilization blossomed. Different races lived in harmony. However, for unknown reasons, the gods left it, and so now it's time for new gods. And the game that they played was created with the purpose of finding suitable new candidates for that planet. Just by trying, they can become god. It's essentially like the Lost World they had played, where at first, only low-class creatures will believe in them. But if they succeed in increasing their number of followers, they may become the one and only god of the planet, and the world becomes theirs. And they'll be able to do everything they want, and all the desires they have ever dreamed of. It is feasible as a god in this world. This was a chance of a lifetime. But things are just too good to be true. He felt that there was something Alden still wasn't addressing. And so Nebula asks the precaution of giving up now. To his surprise, if they give up, they will just go back to their daily life and would lose their memories of this place, which was pretty convenient. And so Nebula asks if this was still the same if he gives up mid-challenge. But just as expected, they were not so generous to let them do that. This begged Nebula to follow up a question, asking what happens if he is defeated by other gods. And Alden just simply answered that, if that happens, he will meet a godly end, and they will welcome it. This is what Nebula had expected. If it was a game where the victor could gain everything, it stood to reason that the participants would have to risk their lives, and should this real-world competition follow the game The Lost World, one might have to risk more than their life. But this just only made him smile. The exhilarating feeling of putting their lives at risks made this game more interesting for him, and so there was no reason for him to give up now. Now that was clarified to all the players. Alden asks the people who plans to give up to step up now and notify her, while for those who want to take on the challenge, she presented cards for them to choose, where it can present them a small area where they will begin their journey. Seeing this, Nebula recognized that it's really just like in the game, the means to start the game with selecting a small area. However, his trains of thought was disrupted as he noticed that other people are giving up already. It started with a few people, but soon others followed as well. With this, Nebula started to analyze how many people was left. Obviously, the starting number of the people that had transported in this place was also the same amount of player of the Lost World could allow in a single planet for a single match, and it was 32. That means the final number of people left was 27, which was still a lot of competition to be the only god of this world. However, his trains of thought were disturbed yet again by the mysterious woman asking him to choose a card first. This could only mean that the order of which they can chose was the same order of their rank, and so he did the honors to be the first one to choose. But as he lifted the card, his eyes grew larger as he was in shock to see that he got this small area of all things. Still, before he could even say anything, he was instantly transported into the Lost World, and into his designated small area, where a beautiful greenery and a stream of river could be seen. And within those rivers, different creatures inhabits the place. However, the inhabitants were more different from what's on Earth, as the supposedly frog actually has a well-toned body that could be easily called daddy. Of how lean he looks, still, it got a heart of a golden retriever, as it was just happy to catch some fish. In the midst of this, a blue butterfly emanating with mysteriousness just casually passed by them. This butterfly turned out to be Nebula's familiar. This is what he got from those cards. The small area of insects. It wasn't insects in a strict sense, but rather a category that covered, to some extent, several arthropods and crustaceans. But among the 32 small areas that could have been selected first, insects wasn't very well evaluated and actually had the lowest winning rate according to actual data. But he didn't let this affect him, since everything depends on how one use it. It is even backward compatible with birds, so it is quite useful in the beginning. However, another problem arises. The starting point where he was at is the eastern end of the continent. This place had a disadvantage in advancing. This means that the battles don't happen pretty often in the beginning, so gaining benefits through early engagement is near impossible to accomplish, and therefore an aggressive strategy like he was used to won't be viable. In that sense, he just needs to focus on finding a suitable species as a starter, and a race that eats insect would be a good starting race, like those frogmen for example. But what bothers him about this tribe was its numbers, and that is because Lost World enables a god to exert influence on creatures equal to the level of faith it possesses. However, the bigger the group, the less little miracles were cared about. So even though it may be a benefit to gain a big tribe in the beginning, there was a risk of vainly consuming all 10 faith points without seeing any result. And this amount of faith points is way too small to have any influence on the group of frogmen. With this, he looked for another group nearby, leading him to wander to a more desolated place, where a small group of lizardmen was wandering around aimlessly. This species was also a great candidate, since lizardmen also eat insects, and they can survive in such extreme condition unlike the frogmen, so he was more compelled to look at them closer. This made him notice of how their number had dwindled a little, which was actually great, as it was just the right amount that Nebula wanted. To his surprise, the group even contained the sick and elderly. With this, he realized that this lizardmen came from the original group, and the reason why they were out in the desert because they must have been pushed out in a power struggle. And at the back of this small group there was a young, wounded lizardman. This was such a perfect setup for Nebula, because the more he feels abandoned by the world, the more difficult and tired he would feel. And with this, he will put all his hopes up for a small miracle to happen. But he is such a fragile being. Still, with an opportunity like this, he decided to go through in supporting this wounded lizard. A few moments later, the group of lizardmen continued to roam this barren land. Exhaustion was noticeable within their expressions. Fortunately for them, they have somehow encountered a wounded gazelle on their path, which they didn't hesitate to charge towards. And because it had been a long time since they saw meat, they act like savages and consumed the gazelle in frenzy, while the wounded and the elderly just sit on the side as this happened. And just a moment more, the once lively gazelle vanished in an instant. All that was remained from it were its bones. But still, the healthy lizardman was planning on consuming this until the very end, as the bone marrow on these bones is also very delicious. However, before they could do that, another one of their kind, Chao, snatched the bones and told them that they already have enough, and they should leave these remains to those who can't hunt. Even though it was just mere bones, the injured and elderly was thankful of it, and they don't even blame the others, as they fully understand their circumstances. But unlike the weak lizards, the healthy ones question Jael if this was really the right decision. They aren't bothered if they give the leftovers to the old or young. But that guy, it was evident that he's going to die soon. The wound is already rotting, It's even a miracle that he was still alive, because with the state he was in now, he should have died already. They don't even know how he keeps up without falling behind. But even with this fact, Jael's belief remained the same. This wasn't just out of sympathy, but because the wounded lizardman named Rakrak was the only one who had faced a saber-toothed tiger when everyone else turned their backs and ran away. Thanks to Rakrak, there was no other damage to the group other than his wounds. If it wasn't for Rakrak, many would have died or gotten injured, and in the worst-case scenario, the whole group could have fallen apart. And of course, the others understood this, and appreciated what Rakrak has done. But the fact still remains that he is going to die soon, and there's not enough food to share with. To which Jael exclaimed to them that they are being shameless, ungrateful son of a lizard, but they don't seem to mind her remarks as they care more about logical reasoning. Still, even with such arguments, they decided to go with Jael's reasoning as it can be seen that Rakrak was still in the group. However, with the group lying near with each other, Rakrak just lay on the corner all alone, and because of his injuries, it made it hard for him to sleep comfortably. However, this also allowed him to immediately notice the blue butterfly just flying around above him, and looking at it with curiosity, it led him to see the top of a hill, illuminated with a shining light, and with nothing else to do, Rakrak had stood up and followed the strange light, and seeing him walk in the middle of the night, made others assume that he is finally leaving the group. Still, it was his own decision to do this, so no one stopped him, and they were just fixated on what he was about to do next, while Rakrak, on the other hand, was grasping on the last purpose he had left in this cruel life of his, and that is to follow what seemed to be a glimpse of hope. But as he ascended, he was wondering if this was just a deranged fantasy of his, and the fact that he was the only one who reacted to seeing it. It might really be the case, and even if what he is seeing right now means something, he wonders what on earth would that be and where it would lead him to. But he doesn't have to wonder for long. As soon as he arrived at the top of the hill, his eyes widened with surprise, as a hill of beetles just erected like a tower. It was enough for the entire group to satiate their hunger. With this, a system message appeared in front of Nebula notifying him that the lizardmen recognized this event to be a miracle, which he was relieved to see, and seeing that other lizardmen enjoyed his gift. The next step is to make them realize this miracle was done by him and let them know his name, his divinity. To his surprise, it seems like he doesn't have to, since Rakrak decided to announce the miracle himself, which was understandable, as individuals with high willpower tend to take care of things on their own. Unexpectedly, with the beetle on Rakrak's hand, they decided to recognize his divinity as the nameless beetle god, which surprised him, as he had expected them to name it Butterfly at the least, since he had used butterflies to guide them for all this time. But Beetle God is still fine, and he understood that no one has a great name from the beginning, so he lets it be. And as he looks over them, Nebula couldn't contain his smile, because he acknowledges that Rakrak will be important to him. Of course, that goes for Rakrak as well. The next day arrived, Rakrak had seen butterflies again. Still, he contemplated to following it again, while his lizard kind on the other hand was excited to know he is seeing butterflies, as this was a sign that they were going to have a full stomach. However, this time, he was hesitant to chase his fantasy right away. Until now, they were in great debt to the swarms of beetles. However, the beetles could be leading them to a trap if one looked at the matter from another perspective, especially when winter is coming soon, and beetles would appear from the cold directions on the north. So if they head in the direction where the beetles came, they will surely freeze to death. And hearing his reasonings, this made the others immediately change their mind on feasting on beetles, and just go to a different direction. But even though this was the logical solution, Rakrak felt that they shouldn't do that, because there is nothing in the opposite direction as well. However, he also admits that he doesn't have a clue on what purpose is there in the fantasy he was seeing, but for now, he just doesn't have any other choice but to follow. Meanwhile, Nebula saw everything and noticed that they are losing faith. Still, he understood that it's just the beginning, so it was reasonable for them to lack faith, and there is nothing he could do. But if he were to be specific, he would rather hear a logical leader than a leader who is blinded by faith. However, if Rakrak would continue believing in him, he is sure to make Rakrak experience a future that he could never imagine. And just as Nebula wanted, Rakrak's tribe walked through the path he had paved, and they then began to climb a small hill that rose past the wilderness. And as they climbed the hill, their eyes began to widen as they couldn't believe what was in front of them. And seeing that everyone was too stunned to say anything, Rakrak turned towards the group and proclaimed that the nameless beetle god has yet again gave them another miracle, as he brought them to a sanctuary, where thick bushes and trees circled the wide spring, from which small waterfalls and streams flowed. With this, everyone cheered with joy from the top of their lungs, celebrating the glimpse of hope of survival that was given to them by believing in Rakrak's decision. At the same time, Nebula's divinity level increased to level 2, and his level of small area has also increased to 2. With this, Blessings of Bug's ability is now available. And this was such an important skill to have, because in the game The Lost World, it was possible to grant a special ability to the believers who supported the small area once the player's small area leveled up. This was called God's Blessing, and it allows the believers to evolve, as the blessings would change the appearance of the species, and the change would be passed down to the descendants. And if his hunch were right, Rakrak would know for sure what he wanted. And so Nebula decided to bless Rakrak and him his priest, in order to deliver his will to his people. A few moments later, the day turned into night. The lizard men sleep peacefully under the clear night sky. And because Rakrak was now a priest, Nebula is now able to get inside his dreams and show himself to him, but with a more familiar persona akin to Rakrak's species. And for this, Rakrak had so much things to ask. But before he could say anything, Nebula just stretched out his arm, like he was asking Rakrak to hold it. But as Nebula expected, Rakrak was insightful. He knew exactly that it wasn't what he wanted, so Rakrak remained still, prompting Nebula to shift his outstretched arm to point at something below. To Rakrak's surprise, he was now holding a buffalo's skull, and somehow, he then lifted it up like he had been doing this for countless of times, and placed it on the nameless beetle god's head. With this, the image of their god became clear to him, and so as soon as the day arrived, he gathered everyone, and with every detail he told them what exactly he had dreamed of. And in hearing this, the more insightful lizardman had deduced that the message of the beetle god he had seen in his dreams was clear, and that he is asking for them to sacrifice a buffalo. However, to hunt a buffalo, they have to go deep into the wilderness, which is just too big of a risk for Jael. However, the others had different opinion of what she just said, as they believed they have a duty to fulfill, since the one who brought them to the sanctuary had personally asked for it. But even with this reasoning, Jael's decision remained the same, as she just doesn't want to put their pack in danger, which they understand where she is coming from. And so they suggested that perhaps all pack of hunters should step forward and join the hunt, to which Jael immediately disagreed, as it was a stupid suggestion, because if they do just that, who will be left to protect the others who are weakened? This argument left the others unable to think of any alternative ways, and so it seems like they were in a predicament. But to their surprise, Rakrak also agreed to Jael's concern. He was a great leader. He isn't willing to put the whole pack in danger as well, so he suggested that he will go alone. This instantly surprised everyone. Even Jael couldn't stand what Rakrak had just suggested, because they know for a fact that it is near impossible to catch a buffalo alone. Seeing them worried like this, Rakrak clarified that he decided this not because he was being reckless, but because God had given him a blessing. This initially confused Jael, and so Rakrak enlightened them about what he just said, explaining to them about how he encountered another unbelievable miracle. When he woke up, his wound has completely healed, and his shoulders were all covered with black scales, just like a beetle. And seeing this with their own eyes, Jael admits that what happened to him is a bit strange. However, this isn't enough of a reason to go hunting buffalo alone, which Rakrak agreed as well, because the real reason is the massive strength he now acquired. To demonstrate this, he hurled a spear to a tree, and penetrated hard enough for it to shatter within contact. This display instantly left all the lizardmen in shock and in disbelief. The impact was so forceful that all that remained on the tree was its bark, leaving the lizardmen in awe. With this, they eagerly inquired if Rakrak had been concealing this extraordinary power. Even though it was a lifeless tree, the showcased strength exceeded their capabilities. So it became apparent that the Rakrak they thought they knew really had undergone a remarkable transformation. But as they marveled at Rakrak's newfound skill, on the horizon, their intended prey emerged and sprinted toward them. Rakrak, seizing the opportunity, announced it with enthusiasm, leaving the lizardmen in shock, as they couldn't believe such coincidence to happen. Because a herd of buffalo always moves to the same place. It makes no sense to get lost and come all the way here. But now, it seems like their previous argument was pointless after all, because their god really wanted that offering. And so without moment's hesitation, Rakrak charged to the herd of buffalo and skillfully hurled his spear into the midst of the group. Striking with precision, the first buffalo, once feared by the lizardmen, fell before their eyes. This boosted the lizardmen's morale, and so they eagerly joined Rakrak in a unified attack on the buffalo. A few moments later, the day turned into night once again. But now, with the countless buffaloes slayed, they had managed to create an altar with bones, and in the top of it was a whole buffalo ready to be offered to the nameless beetle god. And with Rakrak's glib tongue, he uttered the right words to consecrate the offering, and others followed suit. And although it is a sloppy and clumsy ritual for Nebula's eyes, the sincerity behind it was what mattered. So Nebula was able to gain faith beyond his expectations. It was a decent rite. As a novice priest, and now that Nebula thinks of the time he put into it, It was worth doing this much. He couldn't control the buffalo, as he wasn't the god of wild grass that a buffalo eats, so it took him time and effort from other friends of his. The grasshopper, he set them up as a trap, and so as soon as the buffalo got to eat it, he had managed to control it somehow. However, it seems like the lizard ate the baby buffalo as well. Still, this was reasonable, because at this stage, it is difficult to expect they already have knowledge and skills equivalent to herding, but still their ignorance was too much. So it seems like the lizard men are still savages, and the population support of this oasis is not very high. At most, the limit will be a few years, so in their current state, with their primitive ass, who doesn't know anything about farming or ranching, it is bound that they will face difficulty to get through a calamity. However, even if he realized this, he understood that it is still very difficult to realize certain knowledge on your own, and it's not okay to say it directly either because it violates the law of causality. But it's not that there is no way, it will just take some time. So if that's the case, then first thing he has to do is starting by giving a blessing. With this, another light shined towards Rakrak. A few days had passed. The altar they had previously built had grew larger as they have hunted more buffaloes. But what's even more surprising was the significant change Rakrak had gone through because of the blessing that Nebula gave. Rakrak and his men had evolved and had now black scales like the beetle they had consumed. But even with this, Rakrak was troubled, as he had a disturbing dream in previous night, and he doesn't know what it meant, as the vision was ambiguous, where the altar, once a symbol of prosperity, now shook precariously in the unsettling dream. The pond of blessings, which had protected them for many years, had lost its vitality. No more fish thrived in its once teeming waters, and the ground had become so parched that no root plants could be found, which seems to be a dire dream. However, Jael pointed out that it will be a long time before that happens, indicating that he shouldn't worry that much, especially because the god takes care of them, which Rakrak agreed, as believe in God too, more than anyone else. But the god's will often come across as difficult for them to understand, so if the leader is lacking in understanding its meaning, there will come a time that they will betray God's will, and he is afraid of that happening, and so he ponders hard on what his vision had shown him and find out the meaning of it. To his surprise, he doesn't have to wonder for long, as he saw a large group emerging from the horizon. With this, they now know why the altar shook. It was to warn them about the arrival of their enemy, and looking at them closely, there was no doubt that these guys are the ones who kicked them out, and this was obvious as the leader had blue scale like them from before, and above all, the large monster that only the leader could tame was with them, solidifying their recognition. And looking at the numbers, it looks like the entire tribe has arrived. That could mean that their hometown, a wetland with green leather, was completely devastated. This really grinded Rakrak's gear, and the only possible explanation Jaol could come up with was that the large monster was high maintenance, that it depleted their resources at a much faster rate. Nonetheless, they were confident that they will not be able to locate their sanctuary, since it is located on terrain that cannot be seen until you climb up, so there is a possibility that they may pass by without knowing. However, this didn't go as they had hoped for, as the ones who were in patrol, led by Ur, exposed their presence by boldly shouted at the approaching tribe to stop their advances, as this was the sanctuary of the nameless beetle avatar, so they better not take a single step in their turf. However, this only fueled curiosity on the other side. Even Rakrak couldn't believe the stupidity of Ur's. Still, he told Jael not to worry, since this may also be God's arrangement, which confused Jael, so she asked what he meant by that. In response, Rakrak explained that he believed that God deliberately caused this situation. This led Jael to assume he meant it was a test from God, but Rakrak clarified that it might not be a test but rather a mission to accept and save those who were once part of their community. But even if that were the case, Jael remained concerned, since they know all too well that the leader of their previous tribe is just ruthless. He didn't even think twice to drive out the weak tribe into the wilderness, so changing the leader's mind is just impossible. However, as they ponder this, the blue butterfly appeared in front of Rakrak once more, a clear sign of God's will. With this, he realizes that it was foolish for them to dare to think beyond their scope, as they don't have the ability to see the future, and speculating here about what will happen wouldn't get them anywhere. So the only thing they can do right now is to do what they can, and that is to face their adversaries. Meanwhile, Nebula was delighted to see that Rakrak understood exactly what he meant. Rakrak's tribe and the Blue Hide tribe must be united for population growth and technological advancement. But what's a bit strange is that Rakrak made that decision on his own. This led Nebula to believe that this was because of Rakrak's high willpower, and a leader with high self-will is a good thing for Nebula, and only thing he wished now is if only he could instill a firm belief. With this, he would be allowed to control everything individually, and he will be able to express his intentions more efficiently. However, Nebula acknowledged that such developments would take time and a higher level of influence. For now, he resolved to concentrate on the impending battle. And just as expected, the cunning leader of the Blue Lizardmen had decided to use his sly mouth to get more information out of the stupid lizardmen, and with every mock, yours group reveal more and more information about their place. And when the leader was just about to think he got the best of them, someone he didn't expect arrived and answered his domineering question, but with a more confidence and conviction. Rakrak had also revealed that their place had an avatar. Rakrak's demeanor exuded of that of a leader, and so the blue leader had withdrawn his mocking voice and asked seriously what Rakrak meant by an avatar, prompting Rakrak to explain that this place is the domain of the nameless beetle avatar. However, the blue guy doesn't believe in such thing, and with this, he discerned that the leader in front of him is just delusional like the others, and so he regained back his domineering tone and looked down on Rakrak's tribe once more. And then with exuding audacity, he demanded that they leave, assuring them that if they departed immediately, he wouldn't launch an attack. The disdainful attitude even extended to the mount, looking at them as if they were trash. And if that wasn't menacing enough, he confidently asserted that they stood no chance against him, boasting of his countless followers. And according to him, if Rakrak were truly a leader, he should have already calculated by now the undeniable truth of his words. Much to the blue leader's surprise, Rakrak merely shook his head and aimed his spear towards the blue guy, indicating that he is willing to fight him. This in turn caught the blue guy off guard, but even before he could say anything, Rakrak turned his attention to those who followed the blue leader. Attempting to reason with them, he extended an invitation for them to join Rakrak's tribe, promising that under God's protection, they would be cared for according to his will. However, definitely this only made the blue leader laugh hysterically, as he saw what Rakrak was spouting was all bullshit, so it seems like there was no point in them talking, as they were all foolish in the blue guy's eyes. But Rakrak said, "Nah, you don't know God, and now look at this spear. It's sharp," which taken aback the blue leader, because the spear was indeed sharp. But what concerned the blue guy more is that this Rakrak just kept talking nonsense. He definitely crazy, and so he decided to attack this foolish lizard. And as the blue guy attacked, Rakrak prayed to his god to give him courage and strength to defeat the enemy in front of him. However, to his dismay, his god responded, "Psych, you thought," as the spear that he was holding just shattered on impact. With this, he knew it was all over, and so he freezed up. However, before this happened, a system interface popped up in front of Nebula. Since two different tribes came into contact, experience points for both tribes increased significantly. Subsequently, this triggered another system interface to pop up, and since he had been paying a lot of attention to one tribe, these tribes are now part of his territory. With this, another skill was available for Nebula to use, which he didn't think twice to use because of his current circumstance. With this, before the large monster's attack could land, a beam of bright light suddenly fell directly on Rakrak. With this, he was able to dodge the upcoming attack, as he was now exuding a great amount of mana, since he is now one with Nebula, as he had took over his consciousness. Meanwhile, the blue guy doesn't have a single clue on what happened. Still, he tries to attack Rakrak once more. But Nebula, who is in Rakrak's body, just looked at his attempt with an indifferent expression, and their movement was just so slow to him. And so Nebula got time to open the blue guy's status window to see his strength. To Nebula's surprise, Rakrak alone could manage to defeat this fool, so it seemed like the only reason he was losing was because of the little Drake monster, as it had 87 strength beyond what Rakrak has. But with the blessing, it's not difficult anymore, and so Nebula dashed towards the Drake, which caught the Drake off guard of how fast he was. This was possible because the skill Strong Avatar gives the user an additional stat called Divinity. One divinity equals 200 times the maximum value of power that can exist naturally. To put it simply, the power of Rakrak now is 630, and so Nebula easily slapped the Drake's face into the ground, flipping them like they were pancakes. This shocked everyone, as they couldn't even believe it was possible. This overwhelming difference in power was just out of this world. Even Rakrak's own tribesmen, who was used to Rakrak's strength, was in shock, and so silence followed, as they were all too stunned to say anything. But now that the threat was gone, Rakrak's men was about to celebrate. However, it seems like Rakrak remained indifferent, so they halted their celebration. Meanwhile, the blue guy was in disbelief himself. He can't grasp the fact that he was defeated. His calculations were never wrong, and the only conclusion he could make was that Rakrak had pulled a trick from his ass. And so he attempted another attack on Rakrak, but little did he knew, Nebula was still in control of Rakrak's body, and Nebula doesn't give a shit. So he clapped the blue guy so hard that his head was now facing the other way around, killing him on the spot. After that display, with a cold tone, he asks the others if they would also like to try his hands. But who in the right mind would do that? And so they let go of their weapons and swear allegiance to Rakrak and his tribe. And seeing that they have completely submitted, Nebula leave Rakrak's body, and therefore Rakrak regain his consciousness. Still, he knew what had happened and can't believe that it did just happen. The Avatar just come in his body, and he felt he was dreaming. A few moments later, the day turned into night once more, but the paradise they live was livelier than before, as the countless of lizardmen had gained their numbers. And amidst of it, same conversation can be heard. The new lizardmen couldn't believe that what in front of them is the same tribe who went out into the wilderness, as they now have a different color, prompting them to explain that it was because they are following the nameless beetle avatar. That's why they changed and became stronger. If this didn't happen, they would have died wandering in the wilderness. With this story, the new tribe folks now know the strength of the avatar. Even their leader's strength was out of this world. As this happened, Rakrak was just sitting with Jaol contemplating about something. But his trains of thought was disrupted by Jael asking him if their current predicament was okay, because with him accepting the others, their population has increased sixfold. With this, the place they are staying at will rapidly deteriorate, which he knows all too well. That is also the reason he was thinking so hard in silence. But the only option he could think now was that they have to leave this place, which surprised Jael, as they couldn't just wander around the wilderness without any answers, to which Rakrak responded that it wasn't the case. Because he feels it, the answers will definitely lie within them. The answers sent by God through their old brothers.